Father, in Jesus' name, I thank you for this video, and I pray it blesses those who watch it in Jesus' mighty name. This is Boundaries 1.5. We're in Boundaries right now. Just the book we're reading. We're in chapter 1, page 21, 6:30 p.m. If y'all don't have it, go pick it up. But yeah, for some reason, the video cut off in mid recording while I was reading in the last video. And so I had to go adjust my storage and figure out some memory stuff on my phone to record and continue to make this stuff. So I figured that out. And so now I'm picking up where we left off on page 21 in Jesus' name. It says 6:30 p.m. For the fourth and last time, dinner's ready. Sherry hated to scream, but what else worked? The kids and Walt always seemed to shuffle in whenever they felt like it. More often than not, dinner was cold by the time everyone was assembled. Sherry had no clue what the problem was. She knew it wasn't the food because she was a good cook. Besides, once they got to the table, everyone inhaled it in seconds. Everyone but Amy. Watching her daughter sit silently, picking up distractedly at her food, Sherry again felt uneasy. Amy was such a lovable, sensitive child. Why was she so reserved? Amy had never been outgoing. She preferred to spend her time reading, painting, or just sitting in her bedroom thinking about stuff. Honey, what kind of stuff? Sherry would probe. Just stuff, would be the usual reply. Sherry felt shut out of her daughter's life. She dreamed of mother-daughter talks, conversations for just us girls, shopping trips, but Amy had a secret place deep inside where no one was ever invited. This unreachable part of her daughter's heart, Sherry ached to touch. 7 p.m. Halfway through dinner, the phone rang. We really need to get an answering machine to handle the calls during dinner, Sherry thought. There's precious little time for us to be together as a family anymore. Then, as if on cue, another familiar thought struck her. It might be someone who needs me. As always, Sherry listened to the second voice in her head and jumped from the table to answer the phone. Her heart sank as she recognized the voice on the other end. Hope I'm not disturbing anything, said Phyllis Renfro, the women's ministries leader at church. Certainly, you aren't disturbing anything, Sherry lied again. Sherry, I'm in deep water, Phyllis said. Margie was going to be our activities coordinator at the retreat, and now she's canceled something about priorities at home. Anyways, can you pitch in? The retreat. Sherry had almost forgotten that the annual gathering of church women was this weekend. She had actually been looking forward to leaving the kids and Walt behind and strolling around the beautiful mountainous area for 2 days, just herself and the Lord. In fact, the possibility of solitude felt better to her than the planned group activities. Taking on Margie's activities coordinator position would mean giving up her precious alone time. No, it wouldn't work. Sherry would just have to say, automatically, the second thought pattern intervened. What a privilege to serve God and these women, Sherry. By giving up a little portion of your life, by letting go of your selfishness, you can make a big difference in some lives. Think it over. Sherry didn't have to think it over. She learned to respond unquestioningly to this familiar voice, just as she responded to her mother's, Phyllis's, and maybe God's too. Whoever it belonged to, it was too strong to be ignored. Habit won out. I'd be happy to help, Sherry told Phyllis. Just send me whatever Maggie's done and I'll get working on it. Phyllis sighed and audibly relieved. Sherry, I know it's a sacrifice myself. I have to do it several times every day, but that's the abundant Christian life, isn't it? Being living sacrifices? If you say so, thought Sherry, but she couldn't help wondering when the abundant part would come in. 7:45 p.m. Dinner finally finished. Sherry watched Walt position himself in front of the TV for the football game. Todd reached for the phone, asking if his friends would come over and play. Amy slipped unobserved to her room. The dishes stayed on the table. The family hadn't quite gotten the hang of helping clean up yet, but maybe the kids were still a little young for that. Sherry started clearing the dishes from the table. 11:30 p.m. Years ago, Sherry could have cleaned up after dinner, gotten the kids to bed on time, and performed Jeff's handed off project with ease. A cup of coffee after dinner and the adrenaline rush that accompanied crises and deadlines galvanized Sherry to superhuman feats of productivity. She wasn't called Super Sherry for nothing. But it was becoming noticeably harder these days. Stress didn't work like it used to. More and more, she was having trouble concentrating, forgetting dates and deadlines, and not even caring a great deal about it all. At any rate, by sheer willpower, she had completed most of her tasks. Maybe Jeff's product had suffered a little in quality, but she felt too resentful to feel bad. But I did say yes to Jeff, Sherry thought. It's not his fault, it's mine. Why couldn't I tell him how unfair it was for him to lay this on me? No time for that now. She had to get on with her real task for the evening, her talk with Walt. Her and Walt's courtship and early marriage had been pleasant. When she'd been confused, he'd been decisive. Where she'd been insecure, he'd been strong. And now that Sherry wasn't contributing to the marriage, she saw Walt's lack of emotional connectedness. And she had taken it upon herself to providing the warmth and love the relationship lacked. God has put together a good team, she would tell herself. Walt has the leadership and I have the love. This would help her get over the lonely times when he couldn't seem to understand her hurt feelings. But over the years, Sherry noted a shift in the relationship. It started off subtly, then became more pronounced. She could hear it in his sarcastic tone when she had a complaint. She saw it in the lack of respect in his eyes when she tried to tell him about her need for more support from him. She felt it in his increasingly insistent demands for her to do things his way. And his temper. Maybe it was his job stress or having kids. Whatever it was, Sherry never dreamed she'd ever hear the cutting, angry words she'd heard from the lips of the man she'd married. She didn't have to cross him much at all to be subjected to the anger. Burnt toast, checking overdraft, or forgetting to gas up the car. Any of these seemed to be enough. It all pointed to one conclusion. The marriage was no longer a team, if it ever had been one. It was a parent-child relationship with Sherry at the wrong end. At first, she thought she was imagining things. There I go again, looking for trouble when I have a great life, she told herself. That would help for a while until Walt's next temper attack. Then her hurt and sadness would tell her the truth her mind wasn't willing to accept. Finally realizing that Walt was the controlling person, Sherry took the blame upon herself. I'd be that way too if I had a basket case like me to live with, she'd think. I'm the reason he gets so critical and frustrated. These conclusions led Sherry to a solution she had practiced for years, loving Walt out of his anger. This remedy went something like this. First, Sherry learned to read Walt's emotions by watching his temper, body language, and speech. She became exquisitely aware of his moods, especially sensitive to things that could set him off, lateness, disagreements, and her own anger. As long as she was quiet and agreeable, things went well, but let her preferences raise their ugly head and she risked getting her head lopped off. Sherry learned to read Walt well and quickly. After sensing that she was crossing an emotional line, she would employ stage 2 of loving Walt. She did an immediate backtrack, coming around to his viewpoint, but not really, quietly holding her tongue or even outright apologizing for being hard to live with. All helped. Stage 3 of loving Walt was doing special things for him to show she was sincere. This might mean dressing more attractively at home or making his favorite meals several times a week. Didn't the Bible talk about being this kind of wife? The 3 steps of loving Walt worked for a time, but the peace never lasted. The problem with loving Walt out of his anger was that Sherry was dead tired of trying to soothe Walt out of his tantrums. Thus, he stayed angry longer and his anger isolated her more from him. Her love for her husband was eroding. She felt she felt that no matter how bad things were, God had joined them and that their love would get them through. But in the past few years, it was more commitment than love. When she was honest, she admitted that many times she could feel nothing at all toward Walt but resentment and fear. And that's what tonight was all about. Things needed to change. Somehow they needed to rekindle the flames of their first love. Sherry walked into the family room. The late night comedian on the television screen had just finished his monologue. Honey, can we talk? She asked tentatively. There was no answer. Moving closer, she saw why. Walt had fallen asleep on the couch. Thinking about waking Walt up, she remembered his stinging words the last time she'd been so insensitive. She turned off the television and lights and walked to the empty bedroom. When confronted with their lack of boundaries, skip the page. Lying in bed, Sherry couldn't tell which was greater, her loneliness or her exhaustion. Deciding it was the first, she picked up her Bible from the bedside table and opened it to the New Testament. Give me something to hope for, Lord, please, she prayed silently. Her eyes fell to the words of Christ in Matthew 5:3-5. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. But Lord, I already feel like that, Sherry protested. I feel poor in spirit. I mourn over my life, my marriage, my children. I try to be gentle, but I just feel run over all the time. Where is your promise? Where is your hope? Where are you? Sherry waited in the darkened room for an answer. None came. The only sound was the quiet pit-pat of tears running off her cheeks and onto the pages of her Bible. What's the problem? Sherry tries to live her life the right way. She tries to do a good job with her marriage, her children, her job, her relationships, and her Lord. Yet it's obvious that something isn't right. Life isn't working. Sherry's in deep spiritual and emotional pain. Woman or man, we can all identify with Sherry's dilemma, her isolation, her helplessness, her confusion, her guilt, and above all, her sense that her life is out of control. Look closely at Sherry's circumstances. Part of Sherry's life may remarkably be similar to your own. Understanding her struggle may shed light on yours. You can immediately see a few answers that don't work for Sherry. First, trying harder isn't working. Sherry expends a lot of energy trying to have a successful life. She isn't lazy. Second, being nice out of fear isn't working. Sherry's people-pleasing efforts don't seem to bring her the intimacy she needs. Third, taking responsibility for others isn't working. A master of taking care of the feelings and problems of others, Sherry feels like her life is a miserable failure. Sherry's unproductive energy, fearful in niceness, and over-responsibility to the point to the core problem. Sherry suffers from severe difficulties in taking ownership of her life. Back in the Garden of Eden, God told Adam and Eve about ownership. Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Genesis 1:28. Made in the image of God, we are created to take responsibility for certain tasks. Part of taking responsibility or ownership is knowing what is our job and what isn't. Workers who continually take on duties that aren't theirs will eventually burn out. It takes wisdom to know what we should be doing and what we shouldn't, and we can't do everything. Sherry has great difficulty in knowing what things are her responsibility and what aren't. In her desire to do the right thing or to avoid conflict, she ends up taking on problems that God never intended her to take on. Her mother's chronic loneliness, her boss's irresponsibility, her friends' unending crises, her church leader's guilt-ridden message of self-sacrifice, and her husband's immaturity. Whew, come on, Jesus. And her problems don't end there. Sherry's inability to say no has significantly affected her son's ability to delay gratification and behave himself in school. And in some way, this inability may be driving her daughter to withdraw. Any confusion of responsibility and ownership in our lives is a problem of boundaries. Come on, Jesus. Just as homeowners set physical property lines around their land, we need to set mental, physical, and emotional and spiritual boundaries for our lives to help us distinguish what is our responsibility and what isn't. As we see in Sherry's many struggles, the inability to set appropriate boundaries at appropriate times with the appropriate people can be very destructive. Ooh, I like that part. And this one is the most serious problems facing Christians today. Many sincere, dedicated believers struggle with tremendous confusion about when it is biblically appropriate to set limits. When confronted with their lack of boundaries, they raise good questions. Can I set limits and still be a loving person? What are legitimate boundaries? What if someone is upset or hurt by my boundaries? How do I answer someone who wants my time, love, energy, or money? Why do I feel guilty or afraid when I consider setting boundaries? How do boundaries relate to submission? Aren't boundaries selfish? Misinformation about the Bible's answers to these issues has led to much wrong teaching about boundaries. Not only that, but many clinical psychological symptoms such as depression, anxiety disorders, eating disorders, addictions, impulsive disorders, guilt problems, shame issues, panic disorders, martial and relational struggles find their root in conflicts with boundaries. This book presents a biblical view of boundaries, what they are, what they protect, how they are developed, how they are injured, how to repair them, and how to use them. This book will answer the above questions and more. Our goal is to help you use biblical boundaries appropriately to achieve the relationships and purposes that God intends for you as his child. Sherry's knowledge of the scriptures seems to support her lack of boundaries. This book aims to help you see the deeply biblical nature of boundaries as they operate in the character of God, his universe, and his people. Woo. And that's chapter 1, y'all. In Jesus' name, we'll be back with chapter 2 in the next video. In Jesus' name, follow along. If you don't already have the book, go and purchase Boundaries by Cloud and Townsend in Jesus' name. And let's learn how to do this together in Jesus' name. When to say yes, how to say no, and take control of your life. In Jesus' mighty name, boundaries, 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 boundaries. In Jesus' name.